Oh hey there, I'm Brandon. You caught me at a really good time. I've been making good progress on this video game I've been designing.
Sony won't know what hit him. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is an experience, easily one of my favorite games of all time. I've grinded so many hours here and would often get lost in the beautiful landscapes presented before me. Now, if you have no idea what this game is about, it's essentially an action-adventure title developed by Nintendo and published on March 3rd, 2017 for the Wii U and Nintendo Switch. Unlike the other previous Zelda titles, the game's playstyle was more of an open-world sandbox that gave you the freedom to do whatever you want in whatever order you want. You could explore the edges of the map, run around blindly collecting random items, or just sprint straight to the final boss. It's all really up to you. The area you can explore is extremely massive, trumping every other map from previous Zelda titles, which gives the player more room for discovery, and it's amazing just how much there actually is to find. I honestly have wasted a good 200 hours of my life on this game, and I still keep managing to find new places and events hidden in certain areas. On release, the game was rightfully met with critical acclaim, managing a perfect score on IGN and most other game reviewing sites. Now, usually a game met with that much success is gonna warrant a sequel, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Because on June 11th, 2019, a trailer was posted revealing what could potentially be a cutscene for a new Zelda game, with the same Link from Breath of the Wild and Zelda sporting shorter hair. But the best part was at the end of the video when it was announced that a sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is now in development. Now, as excited as I and everyone who watched the trailer was, that did get me thinking, what the hell would a Breath of the Wild sequel even look like? This game would have so much to live up to, and I'm willing to bet the developers know this as well, which is probably why they haven't revealed anything about the game since.
So that's why I'm here today, to essentially give my best guess as to what kind of content we'll get to see with this title, as well as how it'll play out.
I'll be going through pretty much every basis that's required to make a functioning game, so we can kinda build our own version of Breath of the Wild 2. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with the story, which will probably be the easiest part since it's the only thing that has kinda maybe been shown. According to the trailer, it looks like it takes place after the events of the first Breath of the Wild, following Link and Zelda exploring a cave and stumbling upon Ganon's corpse. After that, we get a bunch of different shots, all equally confusing, and one final scene with Ganon coming back to life. I think. So, obviously this is where things get a little confusing, and it's anyone's guess as to what is actually happening. However, I would assume the game would consist of you having to defeat the newly revived Ganon in some way. So at least we have a main antagonist and final boss for the game, even if it's a little we've already seen you please leave. Now again, these are all guesses based on first glance, and from this point on, it's time to get a little creative with my own personal ideas, and we'll discuss more about the possible story once we get into the game itself. Alright, let's kick things off by talking about what kind of game this will be. And by that I mean if it's going to be the same style as the first, where you have free exploration, or if it will become more of a linear style like the other Zelda titles. Taking into consideration that this sequel has high expectations and is supposed to live up to its predecessor, it wouldn't make sense for the game to be in a different style. With so many players getting into the first because of the freedom you were given, it would make sense that the same idea would be desired for the sequel, which means things like the stamina and durability will be staying. That being said, having just an improved version of Breath of the Wild with a different story would be kinda underwhelming, so the real challenge would be finding a way to make the same gameplay style feel new. A really good addition, in my opinion, would be to have the ability to play as both Link and Zelda, by swapping between them at will. Plus, Zelda can have her own abilities contrasting from Link, like maybe she could use her Sheikah Slate seen in Age of Calamity. And speaking of moves, let's go ahead and add some new ones, like more combat options with the swords other than swing and slash, also a charge tackle with the shield that knocks opponents back. And something really fun would be aerial combat, using the glider and sword at the same time to attack airborne monsters. We could even add a new item in general, like the hook shot, where you could get up to higher places faster or swing from one mountain to the other Spider-Man style. However, it would have a limited use before it breaks. Other additions and improvements I would personally implement are new types of arrows, weapons, and armor, original bosses, new allies, shops where you can buy weapons and cooked meals, and durability meters. On top of that, design a fix where longer lasting durability is given to rare weapons. Now, I do think the durability is a good inclusion. It forces the player to conserve their weapons and makes them think about which one would be the best to use. That being said, I personally find it so damn annoying when a weapon I worked really hard to find breaks after stabbing two pigs. So now the gameplay's all covered, and moving on to what is probably the most challenging part of making a Breath of the Wild sequel, where exactly is it going to take place? If we are to assume it will play similar to the first game, it can't just be the same world. There's gotta be new places to explore. So, in light of this conundrum, I propose we go Link's Awakening style and leave Hyrule. We could get transported and find ourselves somewhere completely new. For one, Again, it'd be nice to have some fresh places to explore, plus it's open to the possibility of new enemies and wildlife to hunt for original meals. And hell, throw in some new races native to that area who could have some sort of connection to the Guardians and their technology. Then top it off with biomes we haven't seen before. It could give the designers so much more wiggle room when it comes to inventing ideas that will differentiate the sequel from the first game. Alright, so with all Zelda titles, they need to have their fill of puzzles to solve in order to progress, so let's go ahead and discuss that. In the first game, there were shrines you could go to solve a puzzle and receive a spirit orb. Although while I enjoyed doing that, I personally think replacing them with fewer yet much larger dungeons would be really cool to see. I feel the openness of Breath of the Wild combined with the long maze-like puzzles with tons of enemies everywhere would actually be a very fun and challenging experience for the player. It keeps the theme of exploration while also adding on to it so it can stand out from the overworld. Then, once you do finally clear a dungeon, let's give the player something similar to the spirit orbs. However, instead of needing 4 of them to receive more hearts and stamina, we can decrease the number to 2 since there are fewer areas to collect them. Alright, so a big feature in the first Breath of the Wild game was the Divine Beasts, essentially giant animal-themed robots that you had to hack into to make the fight with Ganon a lot more manageable. Now, I'm not saying we should copy this exact idea, however we do need to have some incentive for the player to travel across the map and visit certain areas. What I'm thinking is we have 4 massive boss dungeons spread out across the world. Each one will be connected to a certain species, but to keep things interesting, let's have them each themed after different technologies and the race they're associated with. That means the puzzles will also be similar to these styles. For example, let's say the Zora have their own dungeon. It would have more of an ocean aesthetic with the puzzles being related to water in some form. On top of that, the boss would be some sort of sea creature. And upon defeating one of these dungeon bosses, the player will receive a piece of an armor plus shield set, which when equipped will give a significant defense boost that doubles when fighting Ganon. And while this gear isn't required to defeat the final boss, it will make it a lot easier, so it'll be up to the player whether they want to go after it or not. Okay, now here's an idea that I believe would work rather well, and Nintendo already has everything they need to do it. Multiplayer. It makes a lot of sense when thinking back to the trailer. We already have Link, and Zelda looks a lot less like dead weight. What if during the main game, someone could join and both people can explore the world together or go separate ways to do different missions? I really have no idea why there isn't multiplayer in more sandbox games. It's the type of genre that screams give me co-op abilities the most. The only problem I can see them running into with this, however, is whenever a cutscene plays or an in-game event happens, they usually reload the world to add or remove something. And due to that, both players would have to be reloaded. But a good fix for this, so the other player doesn't get screwed over if in a bad position, is to have the game detect if the other player is doing anything important like fighting or solving puzzles in a dungeon. And if not, then the cutscene/event will occur. If implemented correctly, I really do think co-op would be a great feature to add. So, after all that, it's time to talk about the finale of this game we've created so far. And even though it's a little tiring that Ganon is undoubtedly going to be the final boss again, what I really want to see from this is a challenging, unique fight. The first game had a decent battle, but it definitely had room for improvement. I feel that it's very important to make sure the player feels like they are actually in a fight. A good way to do this is to make sure the attacks don't get too repetitive. Once the player thinks they've figured out all the moves, throw new ones at them. A variety of phases and being forced to use the multitude of tools at your disposal are other great ways to keep the bout interesting. And of course, we can't forget a final form. But instead of making him bigger like every other Nintendo boss fight, let's focus more on making him scarier as well as increasing his power and speed. And to top it all off, he needs a whole new set of attacks to accommodate his better agility and strength. And putting all that together, I say we have a pretty good final boss. So now that's all said and done, we can discuss the after-game content. This is to give the players more stuff to do in the game as a reward and to keep them engaged. And knowing that, I say we add a few more dungeons to explore, as well as a new armor set complete with powerful stat boosts, but at a steep cost. Also, something interesting we could implement is a new smaller island that you're able to travel to consisting of a single quest to complete, which is to defeat every enemy on the island. However, the catch is all the mobs will have major power boosts and the weather will constantly change, so trying to finish the task will be ragingly difficult. I really want to get the same effect that Champions Road pulled off in Super Mario 3D World. Basically, one final test of all the skills you've learned throughout the game, and once you do finally complete the mission, you'll be rewarded with the Master Cycle Zero from the first game's DLC. And there we go. We covered what I believe a pretty good Breath of the Wild sequel would look like. I tried to cover all the aspects that made the first so great while improving and adding on to them. Trying to come up with a way to make an adaptation to such a complex game was definitely a challenge. However, with the sequel being directed and worked on by Eiji Aonuma, Hidemaru Fujibayashi, and the rest of the team who made the first game, I would say the next one is in good hands. So I'm definitely excited to see how close my ideas were to the real thing. But until then, do I believe my version of Breath of the Wild 2 was the best path path the series could take?
Yes, in fact I do. My creative genius knows no bounds, and for proof, I'm expecting a callback from Nintendo as we speak to confirm my ideas for the game. It took a lot of formal inquiries at the main entrance of the corporate building because the guards wouldn't let me pass for some reason, but I managed to get their attention. Oh, that must be them. Thank you. So I just learned you can send a cease and desist through the phone.